Algebra Lesson 1-4. We spoke before about expressions, and today we're going to change from expressions and start talking about equations. And there's really not too many differences between an expression and an equation, but for the most part, when we talk about an equation, we would say it's an equal sign placed between two expressions, creating a left and a right side of that equation. So yet, when we were talking before about an expression, we might say r plus 8, which is an expression. That in and of itself is an expression. And we could also have another expression of 15. Both of those are expressions. As soon as we stick the equal sign between them, we now have this expression separated from this expression by an equal sign, creating a left side of the equation and a right side of the equation. So we still can have variables, we still can have operation signs, we still can have numbers. The only difference between an equation and an expression, for the most part, is that you have an equal sign. Because you have an equal sign, you will have two sides, a left and a right. And that's really what makes up the equation. An open sentence. Now, I know we're in math, but in a way, you can think about an equation as a sentence. Sentences usually have, nouns and verbs and adjectives, and in this case they'd have punctuation, etc. Well, in math we have sentences as well. It's an equation that contains one or more variables. So even though this right here, 5 plus 2 is equal to 7, that would be a mathematical sentence. It's not an open sentence. And the reason it's not open, there's no variables in here. When something has a variable, it's an unknown. And so it's kind of basically saying we have something that we don't know about, it's an open area, we have to figure out what it is. So this would be a sentence, but an open sentence would be instead very similar. 5 plus b is equal to 7. It's an equation because it has the equal sign and has two expressions, one on each side, but it contains at least one variable. We could have more variables, it just has to have a minimum of one. So this is actually not an open sentence, it's just a sentence. If we were to say 3 plus c plus t equals 14, then that would also be an open sentence. It has one or more variables. An inequality. Now inequalities are not equal, they're unequal. If you kind of look at this part right here without the n on it, unequal sounds a lot like not equal or unequal. So inequalities are formed when an inequality symbol, which we always read them from the left side of the symbol to the right, since the smaller end is on the left, this is the less than sign, the greater than sign, reading it from left to right, less than or equal whenever it has the line underneath it, and then greater than or equal is placed between two expressions. So here's an expression, 3 plus c plus t, and here's an expression 14, but it has an equal sign. If we were to put one of these 4 in between, it would then be an inequality. So we could say 5 plus d plus r is greater than or equal to 22. And this is an inequality. It's got one of those 4. You're not going to use all 4 at once. You're not going to use 2 at once. You're basically saying it's one of these 4 possibilities. Now, if it's just less than or greater than, it has to actually be that amount. If it's less than or equal, greater than or equal, then it can be that amount or possibly more, or be that amount or possibly less. First example, check the solution. Now, we're given an equation right here. And you'll have some problems that are similar to this tonight. 3c plus 2 is equal to 12. You'll notice the semicolon and then a 5. What it wants to know is this going to work if we stick it in there? Would it actually make it a true sentence? 3 times 5 plus 2, does that equal 12? Well, test it out. If you multiply, or if you add 5 plus 2 first, you're going to do this wrong because addition should not come before multiplication. 3 times 5 is 15. 15 plus 2 equals 17. And unfortunately, 17 does not equal 12. Since 17 does not equal 12, this is not a solution for C. It cannot be the answer. So we would say not a solution. Alright, and lastly, write a question that can be used to solve the equation, then use mental math to solve this actual equation. So the question is something we might ask ourselves. You know, if I have something in this pocket, and I have $7 in this pocket, but I know I have a total of $10, I might ask myself, alright, if I know I have 7 and I know my total is 10, what would I have to add to 7 to make my total of $10 in the pockets? And then I might be able to go from there and solve it using my mental math. So here's the equation. N, an unknown number, N for numbers, pretty good variable, plus 6 is equal to 11. And we need to think of a question that we might be able to ask ourselves so that we could then solve this. It's sort of like reverse the thinking in a way. A number plus 6 equals 11. So here's a possibility. It doesn't mean it's the only answer, but here's a possibility we could say. What number can be added to 6 to equal 11? And that's the question we would ask ourselves. We would say up here, use to solve the equation, then use mental math. So if I were to ponder that, something plus 6 equals 11. Well, what plus 6 makes 11? It's got to be 5. So 5 is the answer, using our mental math. 5 would be the best answer for that.